The knock came at exactly 7 a.m. Not a doorbell, not a polite pause between taps. It was fast, even, decisive. The kind of sound that assumes you already know why it's there. Through the tall windows, the lake was still wrapped in fog. The house felt suspended in it, quiet, expensive, temporary. I remember thinking how strange it was that something built to last could feel so easy to erase. When I reached the door, I didn't open it right away. I stood there listening. Shoes on stone, paper shifting. A voice clearing its throat like it was about to read something official. Outside were answers I hadn't prepared for. Court language, ownership, removal, and somewhere behind all of that, family. That morning wasn't about a house. It was about how quickly your life can be redefined by paperwork you never saw signed by people who know exactly where to find you when you're most vulnerable. And once a legal process starts, it doesn't ask how much something meant to you. Before I continue, take a moment to tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I read every comment and I want to know who's here with me. If stories about quiet betrayal, legal truth, and survival resonate with you, please consider liking the video and subscribing. Thank you for staying with me. When I finally opened the door, I kept the chain latched, not out of fear, out of instinct. Some part of me needed a boundary, even a symbolic one. The man on the porch introduced himself calmly. County Sheriff. Name I'd heard before, never imagined hearing here. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look around. He held a folder against his chest like it weighed something. He told me there was an order for possession of the property, effective today. The words landed slowly, one after another, like they were being placed instead of spoken. I remember nodding, not because I agreed, but because my body needed to do something familiar. A reflex. I asked him to repeat it. He did, using the same tone, the same pace. This wasn't news to him. It was procedure. I told him the house belonged to me, that it had been left to me legally by my grandmother. I said it plainly, the way you say your own name. I expected him to ask for proof. Instead, he glanced down at the folder and said he didn't have discretion. He only enforced what had already been decided. In his paperwork, I wasn't listed as the owner. I was listed as an unlawful occupant. That word unlawful stuck. It didn't fit anything I knew about this place. I thought about the tax payments I'd made without missing a year. The invoices for shoreline reinforcement after the storms. The permits. The summers I spent here with my grandmother when she was still strong enough to walk the dock on her own. None of that existed on his pages. Behind him, at a distance that felt intentional, my father stood with his wife. They didn't approach. They didn't speak. They stood near the boat, slip arms folded, watching like this was a transfer already in motion, something being handed off cleanly. His wife shouted across the lawn that I should make this easy, that dragging it out would only make things worse. She used my name the way people do when they're pretending to be reasonable. My father finally spoke. Not loudly, not angrily. He said that if I didn't vacate on my own, a crew would arrive before 3 p.m. He said it like he was offering a courtesy. The sheriff asked me if I had somewhere else to go. It wasn't a loaded question. He wasn't trying to humiliate me. But it landed that way anyway. Because it forced me to imagine my life reduced to logistics boxes, timelines, exits, without anyone acknowledging that something fundamental had just been taken. I told him I needed time to review the order. He checked his watch. He said I could stay inside for now, but if there was no change by midday, he'd be required to return. As he stepped back, I noticed the patrol car parked just far enough from the house that the lights wouldn't reflect in the windows. Discretion again. Everything about this was quiet, controlled, designed not to disturb the neighborhood. They left me standing there with the door half-open, chain still fastened, watching the lake fog thin as the sun climbed. It was barely morning, and already my life had been scheduled for removal. I closed the door and leaned against it, listening to the silence rush back in. I wasn't panicking. Not yet. But I understood something clearly for the first time. Whatever this was, it had been planned, and it wasn't meant to give me time to think. I asked the question only after the door was closed and the house felt sealed again. Not who authorized it, not why it happened. I asked who filed it. The sheriff had already turned away when I called him back. He paused, then looked at the folder like he was confirming something he already knew. When he said the names, he didn't soften his voice. My father. And his wife. For a moment, nothing in my body responded. No rush of anger. No shock that made me dizzy. Just a dull pressure behind my eyes, like something tightening slowly. I thanked him without knowing why, then watched him walk back to his car. When they drove away, my father and Selene stayed where they were. Still by the dock. Still not approaching. It struck me then that they hadn't needed to come at all. Their presence wasn't required. They were there to witness the moment. Inside, I sat at the kitchen table and opened the copy of the order the sheriff had left. The language was precise. Detached. Efficient in the way paperwork always is when it's stripping something down to categories. Petitioner. Respondent. Unlawful occupant. I was listed as having failed to appear. A default judgment had been entered 9 days earlier. 9 days. I read that line again slower this time. I hadn't been out of town. I hadn't been avoiding anything. I checked my calendar even though I already knew. Nothing unusual. No missed court dates, no notices, no warnings. The service address was printed clearly, 42 Linden Crest. I stared at it until the numbers stopped looking familiar and started feeling foreign. That wasn't my address. It never had been. It was Celine's apartment from years ago before she married my father. I had visited it once. That was all. According to the file, an adult female resident had accepted service on my behalf and signed for it. I knew immediately who that was. There was a signature line beneath the statement. Not my name. Just a looping initial and a last name that wasn't mine. Enough to satisfy a form. Enough to move a case forward without me ever being in the room. That was the moment I understood what my father had done. He hadn't reacted impulsively. He hadn't panicked. He had gone into a courtroom and described me as something else. Someone temporary. Someone living at his permission. Someone who could be removed. He had allowed a legal system to redefine me while I was still paying the electric bill. Outside, Selene finally looked up and met my eyes through the window. She didn't smile. She didn't look nervous. Her expression said this had already passed the point of uncertainty. Everything in the file supported that confidence. A narrative had been built. One where I was careless, absent, uncooperative. One where the absence of my voice could be used as evidence against me. I thought about how easy it would have been to miss this entirely. One envelope, one address, one signature that didn't raise enough concern to stop the machine. If I hadn't been home that morning, if I'd been traveling, working, distracted, the house would already be in transition. I closed the folder carefully, like it might spill something if I moved too fast. What unsettled me most wasn't the betrayal itself. It was how procedural it all was. How calmly my father had walked into a system designed for disputes between strangers and used it to erase me from my own inheritance. No confrontation, no conversation, just a filing fee and a waiting period. And standing there in that quiet kitchen, I realized this wasn't about forcing me out. It was about making it official. Once I understood what they were trying to do, panic stopped being useful. This wasn't about shouting or pleading or proving how much the house meant to me. It was about time, about whether I could interrupt a process that had already been set in motion. The sheriff had said it plainly: if there was a procedural error, I could request an emergency stay. If not, the property would be turned over before the afternoon was over. No extensions, no negotiations. I looked at the clock on the oven. It was just past 8. They were counting on that window. On confusion. on me freezing long enough for the deadline to pass. By the time I understood my options, they expected the house to already be legally out of my hands. I forced myself to slow down. The worst thing I could do was react emotionally. If I raised my voice, if I looked unstable, if I gave them any reason to describe me as erratic, it would only reinforce the version of me they'd already submitted to the court. I needed to be precise, documented, boring. I spread the paperwork across the dining table and photographed every page. Case number, judge's name, filing dates, signatures. I zoomed in on the service line until the ink blurred. I emailed copies to myself, then backed them up again just in case. Then I went to the hallway closet and pulled out the fireproof safe. Inside were the things my grandmother had insisted I keep together. The original deed, her will, tax records going back years, receipts from repairs she'd paid for herself before she ever put the property in my name. It was all there, heavy and unarguable in a way no accusation could undo. I carried the box into the kitchen and set it down like an anchor. Before I did anything else, I called the courthouse. The clerk answered with the practiced patience of someone who fields panic for a living. I gave her the case number and waited while she pulled it up. I listened to her typing, the faint echo of office noise behind her voice. She confirmed it was an unlawful occupancy action. I asked when the summons had been issued. 9 days ago. I asked where it had been served. She read the address aloud without hesitation, the same one on the order. I told her I had never lived there, that I had never received notice, that I was currently standing inside the property listed in the complaint. There was a pause. Not disbelief, just recalibration. She told me that if service was improper, I needed to file an emergency motion to stay enforcement immediately, that I would need to appear in person. That timing mattered. I thanked her and hung up. Outside, I could still see my father and Celine by the water. They hadn't moved. They didn't need to. From their perspective, this was already handled. The law was doing the work for them now. I gathered everything I would need. Documents, ID copies, notes, and put them into a single folder. I didn't pack clothes. I didn't pack anything personal. Leaving like that would have meant accepting their version of events. Instead, I locked the doors even though I knew it wouldn't stop anything. It was a habit. A way of telling myself I still had agency even if it was temporary. As I walked to my car, I caught Celine watching me again. This time, she smiled just slightly. Not victory. Certainty. They believed I wouldn't make it in time. Driving away from the house, I kept my eyes on the road and my hands steady on the wheel. I wasn't thinking about losing my home anymore. The courthouse was already busy when I arrived, the kind of quiet chaos that settles in before noon. People lined up with folders pressed to their chests, voices low, faces set. Everyone there had something to lose, even if it didn't look like it from the outside. I went straight to the clerk's window and told her I was filing an emergency motion to halt enforcement. I kept my voice level, neutral. I didn't say my father's name. I didn't explain the history. I stuck to procedure because that was the only language that mattered in that building. She asked for the case number. I slid the paperwork under the glass. As she reviewed the file, her expression changed, not dramatically, just enough to signal attention. She traced a finger down the service section, then paused. She asked me to confirm my current address. When I did, she compared it to the one listed on the summons and looked up at me again. She said the name on the service acknowledgement didn't match mine. Not even close. She turned the screen slightly, just enough for me to see. The signature wasn't just different, it was confident in a way mine never was. Rounded letters. Flourishes I didn't use. The kind of signature someone develops when they expect it to be seen often. She told me that the person who signed for service was listed as a resident at the address. Not as me, not as my agent. Just an adult female. I felt something settle into place then. Not relief. Clarity. The file continued to unfold. My father had submitted a statement identifying himself as the rightful owner of the lake house. He described me as a permissive occupant, someone allowed to stay temporarily, someone who had overstayed. There was a document attached, an occupancy agreement. My name typed neatly at the bottom, a signature that was supposed to be mine. It wasn't. I stared at it longer than I needed to, as if it might change if I looked away. The clerk didn't rush me, she just waited. She told me the case had been assigned to a judge upstairs, that I could submit my motion directly and request an immediate review. As I gathered the papers, she added something else. Another document had been filed recently, 2 weeks earlier. It was a rapid transfer deed. According to that filing, I had voluntarily transferred ownership of the property to my father. No conditions, no compensation, just a clean handoff. My name was on it. My signature was on it, and I had never seen it before. The clerk didn't speculate. She didn't accuse anyone. She simply told me that if the deed was fraudulent, it would change everything. That ownership disputes based on forged instruments were treated very differently. She gave me directions to the legal assistance desk and suggested I move quickly. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my thoughts finally starting to catch up with my body. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a family dispute that got out of hand. It was a coordinated effort to remove me from the property before I could respond, to create a paper trail that would outpace my reality, to make it look like I had agreed to something I would never have chosen. I filed the motion, attached the evidence, included my affidavit denying service, denying the signatures, denying the transfer. When I finished, I sat on a bench in the hallway and waited. I thought about how easily this could have worked, how one forged document could erase years of ownership if it wasn't challenged fast enough. How trust, especially family trust, creates blind spots the law doesn't protect you from. When my name was finally called, I stood up with the folder tucked under my arms, steady again. Whatever happened next, the story on record was about to change. They were already inside when I entered the courtroom. My father sat at the table to the right, hands, folded, shoulders slightly rounded, as if the posture alone could communicate restraint. Celine was beside him, leaning forward, her expression carefully composed concern, without urgency, worry, without fear. Between them sat their attorney papers, aligned with deliberate neatness. No one looked surprised to see me. That detail stayed with me longer than anything else. The judge entered, and the room settled into a formal stillness. Judge Brandt didn't waste time. He reviewed the file, adjusted his glasses, and began with questions that had nothing to do with emotion. Dates, addresses, method of service. I listened carefully, answering only when spoken to. I stated clearly and without embellishment that I had never been served notice of the action, that I had never lived at the address listed, that I was present in the property on the morning enforcement was attempted. Their attorney responded smoothly. He argued substitute service, claimed reasonable diligence, said the papers had been accepted by an adult resident at an address associated with me. Judge Brandt looked up. Associated, how, he asked. The attorney hesitated just long enough to be noticeable. He referenced prior connections, past familiarity, suggested I had ties to the location. That was when the judge turned to Celine. He asked her directly why she accepted service on my behalf at an address I did not reside in. The room went quiet in a way that felt different from before. Not procedural, expectant. Celine explained that she believed she was helping, that she thought I was avoiding contact, that she acted in good faith. Her voice wavered just enough to suggest concern, not guilt. My father didn't look at her. He stared at the table. The judge listened without interruption, then asked a follow-up. Why the address listed had not been verified. Why no attempt had been made to serve notice at the lake property itself, which was clearly identified as my residence in multiple filings. Their attorney stepped in, pivoting quickly. He began suggesting that my absence from earlier proceedings might indicate instability. that perhaps I had been difficult to reach for reasons related to stress or emotional health. Judge Brandt raised a hand. He stopped that line of argument immediately. He said the court would not entertain speculation about mental health without evidence, and certainly not as a substitute for proper service. Something shifted then. Not dramatically, but decisively. The judge turned back to the documents reviewing the rapid transfer deed. He asked me if I recognized the signature. I said no. He asked if I had ever agreed to transfer the property to my father. I said no. He asked if I had ever appeared before a notary for that purpose. I said no. The judge made a note. He asked the opposing counsel to identify the notary who certified the transfer. The name was read into the record. Judge Brandt looked up again and asked a simple question: was that notary present? She was not. He ordered her appearance. There was no raised voice, no warning, just instruction. As the hearing recessed briefly, I sat where I was, hands folded in my lap, breathing evenly. I didn't look at my father. I didn't need to. The silence between us had already said everything that mattered. For the first time since that knock at my door, the process slowed. Not because of sympathy, but because something didn't add up. And in a courtroom, that's the only thing that matters. When the hearing resumed, the focus narrowed. Not to motives, not to family dynamics, to paper. Judge Brandt returned to the rapid transfer deed and studied it in silence. The room waited with him. The sound of pages turning felt louder than it should have been. He asked me again to confirm that I had not signed the document. I told him I had not. He asked where I had been on the date listed beside the notary seal. I answered without hesitation. At work. All day. Meetings back to back. No travel. No gaps. My attorney requested permission to submit supplemental evidence. The judge nodded. I handed over access logs from my firm badge entries and exits time-stamped down to the minute. They showed me entering the building early that morning and not leaving until after sunset. No midday absence. No unexplained break. I added my calendar. Internal emails. A meeting agenda with my name on it. Judge Brandt reviewed everything carefully. Then he asked about the notarization itself. The opposing counsel objected, arguing that the notarized deed was presumptively valid, that challenging it without proof of forgery was speculative. The judge overruled him. He asked for the notary's commission information. The name matched the one on the deed. Leonora Fitch. Judge Brandt paused, then asked a follow-up that felt almost casual. Is Miss Fitch personally known to either petitioner? The objection came too late. Yes, the attorney said. She was an acquaintance of Celine's. Had been for years. No reaction from the judge. Just another note. He examined the notary log attached to the filing, the numbering sequence, the ink, the timestamp. Then he looked up and said he wanted the notary to appear before the court. Immediately. The request wasn't framed as an accusation. It was procedural, routine, the way courts handle discrepancies that can't be resolved on paper alone. Still, the air changed. Celine shifted in her seat. My father finally looked up, then quickly away. Their attorney whispered something I couldn't hear. As the clerk stepped out to contact the notary, I sat very still. I didn't want to project relief or confidence. This wasn't over. Paper can lie. People can lie more convincingly, but data is stubborn. While we waited, the judge reviewed the service documents again. The address, the signature, the declaration that I had been duly served. He asked Celine one more question. Did she personally hand the papers to me? She said no. Did she witness me receive them? No. Did she confirm I lived at that address at the time? No. The answers stacked quietly. When the clerk returned, she informed the court that Ms. Fitch was on her way. We recessed again. In the hallway, I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes. Not in exhaustion, in containment. I couldn't afford to release anything yet. Not anger. Not vindication. Not grief. Because this wasn't just about proving I was right. It was about showing that the version of me they had submitted to the court, the careless adult, the permissive occupant, the unreliable daughter, was a fabrication supported only by documents that couldn't survive scrutiny. When we reconvened, the door opened and Leonora Fitch stepped inside. She looked nothing like the confident signature on the deed. Her hand shook as she took the seat indicated by the bailiff. Her eyes scanned the room once before settling on the judge. Judge Brandt asked her to state her name for the record. She did. Then he asked her the only question that mattered. Did you personally witness Ms. Monroe sign this deed? The room went silent. Leonora Fitch didn't answer right away. She swallowed, adjusted her glasses, and glanced towards Celine as if searching for something, permission, reassurance, and exit. The judge noticed. He waited. Silence in that room carried its own weight. When she finally spoke, her voice was thin. She said she believed the signature was genuine. Judge Brandt asked her to answer the question again. Did she personally witness me sign the deed? This time, she hesitated longer. She said she had been presented with the document already signed, that she had notarized it based on representations made to her, that she had not asked for identification because she knew the family. The judge asked her to explain the logbook. She flipped through the notary register she'd brought with her hands unsteady. The entry number listed on my deed did not align with the surrounding entries. Dates were out of sequence. Times overlapped. I was asked to submit additional evidence. I provided parking records from my office building, time-stamped, unambiguous. My car had entered the garage that morning and never exited until evening. Then came the calendar entries, a meeting that ran directly through the time the notarization supposedly occurred. Multiple participants, video conferencing logs. The judge looked at Leonora again. He asked if she had ever seen me that day. She said no. He asked if she could describe what I was wearing when I signed. She couldn't. He asked if she could describe the room where the signing took place. She couldn't. Finally, he asked her to confirm on the record whether she had witnessed me sign the deed. This time, she answered, no. The word fell flat. Not dramatic. Just final. Celine's face went rigid. My father stared straight ahead, unmoving. Their attorney began speaking, objecting, trying to frame it as an administrative mistake. Judge Brandt cut him off. He stated that notarizing a document without witnessing the signature was a serious violation. That inconsistencies in the logbook combined with evidence of my physical presence elsewhere undermined the validity of the deed entirely. Leonora's shoulders slumped. She admitted she had been asked to help, that she hadn't thought it would escalate, that she trusted Celine. The judge instructed her to stop speaking. He addressed the courtroom. Based on the evidence presented, he found the rapid transfer deed to be invalid. He found the service of process improper. He found the default judgment to be entered in error. The legal narrative collapsed in real time. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow. Because none of this was accidental. It had required coordination, planning, a willingness to lie repeatedly across multiple filings to achieve a specific outcome. Judge Brandt ordered the immediate suspension of enforcement. He vacated the eviction order. He dismissed the underlying action due to fraud upon the court. He then referred the matter to the district attorney's office for review. The words carried consequences far beyond the room. Leonora was informed that her notary commission would be subject to investigation. She nodded, eyes downcast. As the hearing concluded, I gathered my documents slowly. My hands were steady, but my chest felt tight, like I'd been holding something in place for too long. My father stood up but did not approach me. Celine avoided my gaze entirely. The judge issued a final instruction. He advised me to seek a protective order if I felt unsafe. He advised that my father and Celine be prohibited from entering the property until further notice. I thanked him, quietly. When I left the courtroom, the hallway felt different. not lighter, just clearer. The truth hadn't needed emotion to survive. It had only needed time and evidence. The ruling was read into the record without ceremony. Judge Brandt stated that the default judgment was vacated in full. The eviction order was void. Enforcement was permanently stayed. The underlying action was dismissed with prejudice due to material misrepresentation and fraud. The words were clinical, but their impact rippled outward. He ordered that a certified copy of the ruling be issued immediately. He instructed the clerk to flag the case for referral to the district attorney's office for potential criminal investigation, citing conspiracy, fraudulent conveyance, and falsification of notarized instruments. No one objected. Leonora Fitch was informed that her notary commission would be subject to administrative review. Suspension pending investigation was recommended. She nodded once slowly, as if accepting something she'd already begun to understand. The judge then turned to me. He advised me to file for an emergency protective order barring my father and Celine from the property. He referenced the attempted unlawful removal, the forged documents, the proximity of the petitioners to my residence. His tone was careful, not alarmist, but firm. He granted it. They were prohibited from entering the lake house or initiating contact related to the property until further proceedings. The hearing ended shortly after. Outside the courtroom, the hallway buzzed again with ordinary motion. Other cases, other crises. Life moving forward without regard for what had just collapsed behind a closed door. I stood at the clerk's window and waited for the certified copies. When they slid the papers under the glass, I checked the seal twice. Embossed. Official. Real. That mattered. I left the building alone. No one followed. No one spoke to me. My father and Celine exited through a different door, their attorney close behind them. There was no final confrontation. No apology. No attempt to explain. The drive back to the lake felt longer than usual. My body hadn't caught up yet. The adrenaline that had carried me through the morning finally drained, leaving a strange heaviness in its place. When I reached the house, the fog was gone. Sunlight hit the water, directly exposing every ripple. The patrol car was no longer there. The dock was empty. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, carrying the ruling with me like proof of existence. The house was unchanged. Furniture where I'd left it. The quiet intact. And yet, everything felt different, as if the walls had absorbed what had almost happened. I placed the documents on the kitchen counter and stood there for a long time, not moving, just breathing, letting the stillness return on my terms this time. Later that afternoon, I followed the judge's advice. I contacted the county recorder and filed a fraud alert against the property title. I requested a full audit of recent filings. The clerk noted irregularities in the notary codes, small discrepancies that suggested this hadn't been an isolated act. I documented everything: texts, voicemails, emails. One message from Celine arrived just before evening. She called it a misunderstanding, said families make mistakes, suggested we talk once things calm down. I didn't respond. My father sent nothing. That absence said more than any message could have. I changed the locks before nightfall, installed cameras at each entrance. Not because I expected them to return, but because boundaries once crossed don't reset on their own. As darkness settled over the lake, I realized something quietly, without anger. The law had recognized what my family refused to, and that was enough. In the days that followed, the house settled into a different kind of quiet. Not the fragile silence from before, the kind that waits to be broken, but something firmer, intentional. I filed the fraud alert with the county recorder in person. The clerk walked me through the process without commentary, her fingers moving quickly over the keyboard. When she paused, she told me they had already flagged irregularities tied to the notary's commission number. Small inconsistencies, alterations that wouldn't mean much on their own, but together suggested a pattern. That confirmation didn't shock me. What surprised me was how little satisfaction it brought. I returned home and began documenting everything. I archived messages, saved screenshots labeled dates. I treated my own life like evidence because that's what it had become. Something that needed to be preserved accurately without emotion in case someone else tried to rewrite it again. Selene sent another email that night. Longer this time, softer. She framed the entire thing as a misunderstanding amplified by stress. She mentioned family, healing, the idea that legal systems complicate things that should stay private. She never mentioned the forged deed. She never mentioned the false service. She never mentioned standing by the dock while the sheriff told me I was being removed from my home. I didn't reply. My father didn't contact me at all. No apology, no explanation, no attempt to check whether I was okay. The silence was complete, and in a strange way it clarified more than any confession could have. It told me that what mattered most to him wasn't reconciliation, it was control. And when that failed, withdrawal became the final statement. I replaced every lock, installed cameras that covered the driveway, the dock, the perimeter. Not out of fear, but out of acknowledgement. Trust once used as leverage doesn't regenerate on its own. At night, I sat by the window and watched the lake darken. I thought about how close I had come to losing something that anchored me, not just the house, but the sense that truth would protect me automatically. I had believed that being careful, responsible, and transparent would be enough. It wasn't. What saved me wasn't morality. It was documentation, process, timing. I learned how easily reality can be bent by paper if no one challenges it fast enough. How systems don't recognize loyalty or memory, only filings and signatures and deadlines. And I learned something else too. Family doesn't get special access to erase you. Not legally, not emotionally, not quietly. Standing in that kitchen again, with the certified ruling tucked into a folder and the house firmly back in my name, I understood that the truth doesn't need consensus to exist. It doesn't require agreement. It only requires that someone is willing to hold onto it long enough for it to surface. I stopped waiting for acknowledgement. I stopped hoping for remorse. I started building something quieter in its place, distance, clarity, and a future that didn't rely on permission from people who had already shown me who they were. The lake was still there. The house still stood. And for the first time since that knock at the door, so did I. When everything went quiet again, I realized the hardest part wasn't almost losing the house. It was losing the assumption that truth protects you by default. For a long time, I believed that if you lived carefully, paid what you owed, showed up when it mattered, didn't take more than you were given, reality would eventually line up behind you, that the facts would speak loudly enough on their own. That family, even when flawed, wouldn't cross certain lines. What I learned is that truth doesn't defend itself. It waits. It waits for someone to notice a discrepancy, to ask the extra question, to stay calm long enough to document what others are trying to rush past. Pain doesn't make you weak, but reacting without clarity can. I didn't win because I was right. I won because I stayed present. Because I slowed down when everything was designed to push me out quickly. Because I treated my own life like something worth verifying. And because I stopped expecting loyalty from people who had already chosen convenience over honesty. That shift changes how you move through the world. You stop arguing with narratives that aren't meant to include you. You stop explaining yourself to people who benefit from misunderstanding you. And you start building boundaries that don't require permission or validation. If this story brought up something familiar for you, if you've ever felt quietly displaced, legally cornered, or emotionally erased, I'd really like to hear about it. Share your experience in the comments. You're not as alone in it as you might think. And if you found value in staying through this story, please consider liking the video and subscribing. Thank you for your time, your attention, and for listening.